Knit fabrics are in everyone's wardrobe. In fact, as you watch this, you're probably wearing at least one article of clothing made out of knit. So why are you so afraid to sew with knit fabric? My guess is because somewhere along the line, someone told you that knits are hard and they don't behave like woven fabrics, and you probably shouldn't use them. And because of that, you've built this up into your head that knit fabrics require some sort of special skill in order to sew them correctly. Today, I'm going to set the record straight, and I'm going to give you 3 tips to help you sew better with knits, plus a couple of helpful hints. So keep watching. Hi, I'm Tony, and this is So Lounge. I'm super excited we're hanging out together today. Now, if you're afraid of sewing knits, you are in good company, because for years I was afraid of sewing knits too. And it's only been in the last couple of years that I've gotten over that fear and actually sat down to sew with knits. My fear of knits goes all the way back to college, when I was just learning how to sew and I was finding new fabrics and trying new designs, and I was really excited. And I went to my professor and I asked her if I could use knit fabric for the project I was working on, and she said no, because knits were hard, knits were unpredictable, and the program I was in focused on wovens, not knits, so I could not use it for my project. And because she was my professor and I respected her opinion, I just accepted the fact that knits were hard, and I never used them. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago when I decided I wanted a dress. I was going on a trip. I wanted something comfortable but cute to wear on the plane. And I just decided I was going to try it out and see how it went. So this is my dress here. It's the first thing I ever sewed in knit. And you know what? It wasn't nearly as hard as I thought it would be. Now, granted, it's not perfect. I did stretch out the neckline a little bit, but that's because nobody gave me the tips that I'm giving you today. What kind of experiences have you had sewing with knits? Something good, something bad, a little bit of both? I'd love to know. Leave a comment below. Tip number 1 is to understand your knit fabric. Now, we all know that knit fabric is knitted and not woven, but what does that really mean? If you've ever made a scarf or tried any type of knitting, you know it's a series of loops that are all interconnected in rows to make whatever you're making. Me personally, I can only make scarves. So the loops that go vertically in the knit are called wales, and the loops that go horizontally are called courses. And they work together to make the stretch. So depending on how loose or tight something is woven will indicate the type of stretch. So I knit very loosely, so there's a lot of stretch in the wales, there's a lot of stretch in the courses, and that's my knitting for you. I dug through my scrap stash to find some examples of different knits and to show you the different types of stretch. Now, basically there are 2 types of stretch. First is a 2-way stretch knit. The second is a 4-way stretch knit. And thankfully, I've got examples of both. Now, this is some Italian 100% cotton. It's just a jersey knit. And I made a dress with this, and you can see how it stretches from side to side and, creates a nice fit. Now, if you look at the stretch vertically, there's almost none. It's pretty much non-existent, because this is a 2-way stretch. So that's all it's ever going to do. It's never going to stretch more than that. Now, I've got my striped fabric over here, my fruit stripe gum fabric, and this is a great example of a 4-way stretch knit. Now, this is lyocell and I think spandex or lycra. One of them's the brand name and one of them isn't. So it's the same thing. And if you look, this stretches horizontally and vertically, which gives you a 4-way stretch. So understanding the different types of stretch is the first step in understanding your fabric. The next step you need to understand is the percentage of stretch in your actual fabric. This is my stretch ruler that I got from Stitch Buzz, and it's super handy when you're trying to figure out the amount of stretch in your fabric. I will put a link to their Etsy shop in the description below. They are a small Texas business, which I like to support whenever possible. Now, this would have been super helpful when I was making my purple knit dress to see the difference in the stretch. And I don't remember what the pattern called for specifically, but I've got my 10 inches folded in half and I'm just going to stretch it out. So this purple knit has 20% stretch compared with the green Italian knit that I used to make the second version of the dress using the same pattern. And this one has 30% stretch. So the fit between these two, even though it was pretty much exactly the same minus the sleeve finish, the purple was much tighter because it had 10% less stretch, which totally makes sense, but it's not something I even had on my radar back then. This is the Fruit Stripe Gum fabric, which has the 4-way stretch, and I've got that cut, and I'm going to stretch it out. So this is 40% stretch. I can actually stretch it all the way to 50% stretch, although the print is getting kind of distorted at that point. So let's just call it 40. And you can see how much more stretch it has because it's got the added spandex in there to give it that additional stretch. Now, in case you were wondering, fleece is also knit. This is a 10-inch strip folded in half, and we can check the stretch on that as well, which is about 20%. So having one of these rulers is extremely handy when you have a pattern that says make sure your stretch is at least 20%, or you want to use fabric that's 40% or higher, because that means that the pattern is specifically cut for that type of knit, and you're going to have better success when you sew it up. One thing I forgot to mention is if you do not sew a lot of knits and you do not want to buy a stretch ruler specifically designed for the percentage of stretch, you can find lots of downloadable knit stretch percentage rulers on the internet, and then that way you can just print it out yourself and have a good reference. Now, along with percentage of stretch comes recovery. If you're wondering what that is the bounce back that you saw in the previous segment after I stretched the fabric. So pretty much the fleece and the stripe fabric both bounce back very easily, as did the purple fabric, but this green knit did not. And if I put them next to each other, let's see if you can show you guys this. Even though these were both started out the same size, let me do it this way. The green fabric is slightly longer by about, I'd say, 1/4 of an inch, because it has poor recovery. So it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the fabric. It's just that once I wear it once, I'm going to stretch it out and I'm going to need to wash it to get it to shrink back to its original size. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If you have fabric that has very poor recovery, meaning that if I would stretch it like the 2 inches and it stays that way, you don't want to use that fabric to sew. It's got very poor recovery. 1/4 of an inch is manageable. That just means it needs to be washed before you can wear it. But when it's something that's that extreme, it's going to start stretching out as you're wearing it and look really frumpy and poorly made when your skills have nothing to do with it. It's just the quality of the fabric. Now, one other thing to keep in mind when it comes to understanding your fabric is that when you lay out your pattern pieces, you want the stretch to be going around your body. So don't make the mistake of putting the stretch on the vertical. It doesn't need to stretch that way. It will stretch out hems if you put it that way. You want it to go around your body because that's what gives you the fit of knit fabric, and that's kind of the whole point of using it. Here's a helpful hint when it comes to your fabric. Pre-wash and dry your fabric the same way you plan to wash and dry your finished make, because that way you know what to expect. And you also, the whole point of knits is like having something super comfortable and easy, and washing and drying is the easiest way to launder your clothing. Now, this purple fabric is 100% cotton. It is super forgiving. I washed it, threw it in the dryer on low, then I made my dress. I have since washed and dried my dress multiple times. It has held up and it still looks great. Now, with my stripe fabric, I remembered that it was lyocell, and so I looked up the instructions for washing, and while lyocell can be washed, it does not like to be dried. In case you didn't know, lyocell is a cellulose man-made fiber, so it's similar to rayon, and just like rayon, it doesn't like being dried. So when I pre-washed this fabric, I threw it in the dryer on air dry, and then since I've made up the skirt, I wash it on delicate and I just hang it up to dry. That way, my garments last a lot longer and they still look good. And by pre-washing, I don't have any surprises by, making it first and then washing and having it shrink or colors fade or any of that kind of stuff. Tip number 2, use patterns designed for knit fabric. It's going to make your life easier. They are specifically designed, and added bonus, they have the little stretch gauge on the back, so you don't have to get a stretch ruler if you don't want to. And this little ruler is helpful in determining if your fabric is going to stretch enough. I don't think I used this when I made the purple knit. I think I just used it because it was knit fabric. So as a result, the purple knit fabric in this dress in a size 16 had more of the fit I wanted, whereas the green fabric in the dress, which was 10% more stretch, was a little bit too big in a size 16. Now, last year was a whole process of understanding knits and how they worked and making mistakes and learning from them. So the biggest mess from last year was this butterick dress where I made it in a size 16, not realizing that there was ease in the pattern and I should have gone down a size. After making this, I realized the error, and so when I made a simplicity dress, I just made that one in a 14 and it fit perfectly because it was also knit fabric. But the 16, which was based on my normal body measurements, were still a little bit too big. So if you're unsure of the pattern, you can always check the ease that is actually printed on the individual pattern pieces. So with this butterick, this is the top bodice, and so it's got the bust point with the measurements and then the waist point with the measurements. And the bust point for a size 16 is 37 inches, which that could have gone either way because I'm 38 measurement, so that would have worked. But when you move down to the waist, the 14 is a 30-inch waist, which is what my waist is, and the 16 is a 32. So when you think that, okay, that's just the measurement without the fabric stretching, you definitely want to go with the smaller size because then it's going to give you the fitted look you want from a knit. And I didn't think to even look at that, and I just made the dress and it was way too big, in addition to the other design problems that I had with it. So the butterick pattern does actually have the percentage of stretch listed on the pattern, that it has to be 35%. Simplicity and McCall's don't put that actual percentage number in. Oh no, wait, on this one it does. It says this one has to stretch 50%. Simplicity did not put it on this pattern, and let's see about Vogue. No, Vogue does not have a percentage on there. So that's just something to keep in mind. When you're using patterns that are designed for knit, they're not 100% foolproof, so double check your measurements against the finished measurements of the garment and then make that educated decision about, if my fabric's going to stretch, should I go down a size? Because for me, the answer is yes. I should always make a 14 if I'm making something in knit. And then that brings me to my next point. I am making this top. It is the Jade top from Made by Ray, and I'm making it in the purple fabric, which has the 20% stretch. And in the instructions for this indie pattern, which is actually really cool, it says that if the percentage of stretch is less than, hold on, I gotta check, less than 50% stretch, then I need to go up a larger size. So normally based on my measurements, I would be a large, but because I'm using a knit with only 20% stretch, I need to go up to the extra large size. So fingers crossed that works. It remains to be seen, and I was planning on using the purple fabric kind of as a muslin tester anyway. So we'll see how it works. I think it'll be fine. based on the pattern recommendations and everything I've read. So that will be something to see how it goes. But keep the pattern in mind. If you've got more information, check it to make sure you make the right size, but definitely stick with a knit pattern. Now, if you're wondering, but Tony, can't I adjust a regular pattern? Yes, you can, but there's a lot more factors that go into it. You have to, pattern out the darts because you don't need darts in knit clothing. And you have to adjust for the ease. This pattern is made with negative ease, meaning that it's actually smaller than your actual body measurement, so that when you make it and then put the garment on, it's going to stretch and fit the way it's supposed to. Some of these patterns, not so much, so check the measurements. But don't mess with trying to adjust patterns. That is skilled pattern making. It is a lot of work. Of course, if you want to try it, go for it, but just keep in mind it's not just making it a size down. There's some other calculations you need to do when you're taking a woven pattern and trying to make it a knit. Tip number 3 is to make sure you have your sewing machine set up to sew knit fabric. Now, the first thing you need to do is change your needle. Universal needles are pointy and are not great for sewing knits. You want a ballpoint needle or a needle that's specially designed for stretch fabrics so that you don't damage your knit fabric. Now, Schmetz makes a jersey ballpoint needle, and they also make a stretch needle specifically for stretch fabrics. I usually use the stretch needle for 4-way stretch fabrics and fleece, and I use the jersey ballpoint needle for my 2-way stretch knits. Either of these will work. Here's a helpful hint. When you're choosing the needle size, it's the same as when you use your regular fabric. So if you're using a lightweight knit, a 70 size needle would work. 80 is good for a medium weight knit, and 90 is better for double knits and fleece. So keep that in mind when you buy your needles. I usually get a multi-pack with a bunch of different sizes, so I have more options. Once you get your needles changed, next thing you want to do is adjust your stitch.
The easiest stitch to use to sew knits is the zigzag stitch. So every machine has one, and that makes it super easy to use. All you need to do is adjust the length and the width of your stitch to make sure it works properly for your knit. Now, a lot of machines these days have additional stitches that you can use. A lot of them have stretch stitches. My machine has a variety of stretch stitches. That's a stretch stitch. That one's a stretch stitch, and I believe these are as well. But I usually just stick with a zigzag stitch, adjust it to a 2x2, and then test it out on my fabric.
I've got my little sample swatch here to test out the stitch length and width with the fabric I'm going to be using. I'm just going to run that through real quick and see how the 2x2 works. Let's take a look. That looks pretty good. Let's check the inside. It's a little bit large. I think I might want that a little bit smaller, so let me grab another sample. And I'm going to reduce both down to 1.5. Try again. All right, so that's our 1x1 stitch length. A little bit smaller. Let's see how it looks. That looks nice from the inside. And I think that's going to be the one I go with. The more you practice with knit fabric and handling it and how to hold it, the better you're going to get. So once you kind of figure out what stitch length and width you want for your fabric, then you can use some of the scraps after you've cut out your pattern pieces to, just test out and get kind of used to holding it. When you sew knit fabric, you don't want to pull or push the fabric. You just want to let it feed through the machine at its own rate, let the feed dogs do their job, and not stretch it out. Now, when you're putting on cuffs or a neckband, you do have to stretch it a little bit, and that's usually built into the pattern, so don't stress about it there. But for the most part, you just want to let the machine do the work. Now, if you happen to have a walking foot because you have a quilting edition of your particular brand of machine, that might help too. I don't have a quilting foot, so I'm not using that in this video. I find that a lot of sewers don't, but quilters who sew might. So that's another helpful hint for you if you are having trouble having your fabric feed through your machine kind of evenly. Try a walking foot. If you've got a tip for knits that I didn't cover today, let me know in the comments below. So those are my 3 tips for sewing with knits to make better clothes. I learned the hard way, so you don't have to. The thing is once I started sewing knits, I actually liked it. And once I started using these tips, it actually got a whole lot easier, and it's actually fun. And it is true, sewing with knits is easier. If you've enjoyed this video, you totally want to check out this one coming up next.